great eagle were given to the woman, so that she could fly into the wilderness to her place, where she was nourished for a time and times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. So from this we know that time, times, and half a time is the same as 1,260 days. It's 3.5 years. Time is 1 year, times is 2 years. Add those up, that's 3, and then half a time for a total of 3.5 years. And as we saw in the verses, time, times, and half a time is the same as 1,260 days. So we also see that the length of the Antichrist reign is given in Daniel 7:25 as time, times, and half a time. And that is again repeated in Revelation 13:5 as 42 months. So here we see in Daniel 7:25, he will speak out against the Most High and wear down the saints of the Highest One, and he will intend to make alterations in times and in law, and they will be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. And in Revelation 13:5 we read, there was given him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies, and authority to act for 42 months was given to him. So by this we know that the reign of the Antichrist in Revelation 13:5 of 42 months is exactly 1,260 days, and in Daniel 9:27 we find the Antichrist committing the abomination of desolation, which is when the Antichrist will enter the temple of God and declare himself to be God and demand to be worshipped as God. And of course that's what Satan has wanted from the beginning. He has wanted to ascend to the throne of God and to be worshipped as God. Now at that time the Antichrist will put a stop to Jewish sacrifices and to worship. In 2 Thessalonians 2:4 we read that he is the one who opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God. Now we know from Daniel 9:27 that this takes place in the middle of the tribulation period, but in the middle of the week, and that is a prophetic week, which is equal to 7 lunar years. During the middle of this week, he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering, and on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate. The abomination of desolation makes God's temple desolate. After this, Antichrist will continue in power until he is destroyed by Christ at the second coming, which we also see in Daniel 9:27. Even a complete destruction, one that is decreed, is poured out on the one who makes desolate. So this can only mean that Antichrist is destroyed on exactly the 1,260th day of his reign. So we see the destruction of the Antichrist in Revelation 19:20 when Christ returns to earth at the time of the second coming. Now at that time the Antichrist and the false prophet will be thrown alive into the lake of fire. So from this we can learn a lot about the timing of the ministry of the two witnesses. In Revelation 11, after learning of the ministry of the two witnesses, we discover that when they have finished their testimony, the beast that comes up out of the abyss will make war with them, and he will overcome them, and he will kill them. Now that's found in Revelation 11:7. We are also told in Revelation 11:9 that their bodies will lie in the streets of Jerusalem for 3.5 days, and Revelation goes on to say that after the 3.5 days, the breath of life from God came into them, and they stood on their feet, and great fear fell on those who were watching them, and that's Revelation 11:11. Now for demonstration purposes, I'm going to assume that the ministry of the two witnesses takes place during the last half of the tribulation period. So let's look at that and let the logic of that play out. At the midpoint of the tribulation, the Antichrist commits the abomination of desolation. At the exact time, the ministry of the two witnesses begins, and they minister for the prophesied 1,260 days, which is also the exact length of the reign of the Antichrist. Now, on the final day of the reign of the Antichrist, 1,260 days, he kills the two witnesses, because that's also been 1,260 days for them. So on that day, he kills the two witnesses. However, at that same time, Jesus Christ comes back right then, and he has the Antichrist and the false prophet thrown into the lake of fire. Now, even though Christ has returned to set up his kingdom, and he is judging the nations, we're supposed to believe that the world watches the bodies of the two witnesses for 3.5 more days, even though Christ is on the earth. We're supposed to believe that they're watching these bodies in the streets of Jerusalem for 3.5 days, and they're celebrating their deaths, they're celebrating their destruction, they're celebrating the end of their testimony and their witness. And so the whole earth is celebrating that they're gone, and they're giving each other gifts. But all the while, Christ has returned, and he has defeated the Antichrist and the false prophet, and he's judging the nations. So, by looking at this timeline, if the ministry of the two witnesses is during the last half, the problem only continues to get worse from this point, because after the 3.5 days, the bodies are resurrected and there's a great earthquake. Then in Revelation 11, the third woe begins, and the seventh trumpet is blown by the next angel, and after that the 7 bowl judgments begin. And all of this while Christ is present on the earth, setting up his millennial reign. So here we have the tribulation continuing into the millennial reign of Christ. So if you place their ministry in the second half of the tribulation, all of this is happening 3.5 days after the second coming. So I'm sure you can see the problem with this. This is a huge problem. So it's simply a fact that the judgments of Revelation are all completed before the second coming of Christ. The time of the witness's ministry cannot be in the second half of the tribulation. So we see here that the account of Revelation of the two witnesses must not be in chronological order. So it's not reasonable to imagine that Christ has returned to earth as King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and all of this is going on. He just would not allow this. So I just don't think this is so. I just don't think it's possible that their ministry is in the second half of the tribulation. Now, the more logical assumption is that the ministry of the two witnesses takes place in the first 3.5 years